Hello everyone and welcome yet again to another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you guys yet again for tuning in to the show. Happy Wednesday everyone. We're at the midway point of the week and this show should be an exciting one for this occasion. We're going to be discussing the Euros midweek recap in terms of fantasy. We are going to be looking at specifically the Spain-France semifinal that took place yesterday. What a game we had there. Then we're also going to be looking at the 2024 NHL draft class and determining which rookies, especially those like Celebrini and Levshunov, who were taken at 1 and 2 overall, are going to make an impact in terms of fantasy hockey. And we'll also be looking at the DeMar DeRozan trade. As we all know, he is now a Sacramento King. We're going to look at what that means for the Kings as a team in both betting odds and in terms of fantasy value. And last but not least, we're going to finish off with two very boom or bust player profiles, if you will. Before we get into any of that, I do want to remind you guys to like, follow, and subscribe to the show if you are so willing. It is a huge support to both me, my fellow podcasters, and the network, so consider doing that. Also, we do receive a ton of tips and donations as well, so if you do feel so inclined, please leave them at the link, gsmc.cloud. It is a huge support as well to both me, my fellow podcasters, and the network as a whole. So anything you leave is greatly appreciated. You can also leave any burning questions, comments, or concerns about the show and any of its prior segments, or even segments on today's show, and they will be answered and addressed at the beginning of the next episode. Without further ado, let's jump right into today's episode, starting off in the Euros. We had a very exciting game yesterday in the semifinals of the tournament between Spain and France, two very different styles. France looking much more pragmatic and defensively solid. Spain wanting to utilize those two young wingers, those two electric wingers, and Nico Williams and Lamine Yamal to the best of their abilities to gain a sense of further attack. And ultimately, that ideology won out. The combination play of Lamine Yamal and so many different players who are just increasing their work rate for a Spanish side who refuses to die. Spain ultimately comes out victorious. And before we go into any of the Euros fantasy stars, I just want to preface this with saying that even though we've talked about this player before, it is no doubt in my mind, there is no doubt in my mind, that Dani Olmo is the player of this tournament. He's reminiscent kind of a Federico Chiesa in the Euros in 2021, where he didn't necessarily have the biggest role in the squad, but he certainly had the most important part of the squad. And many can say that without his creativity and intelligence on and off the ball, they might not even be at this point. They could have been knocked out by Germany. But Dani Olmo being in the squad for Spain gives them a different alternative than just relying on Nico Williams and Lamine Yamal to go forward. But ultimately, those two have reacted well to the pressures, the burdens being placed on their shoulders in this tournament, especially yesterday. And we start off our Euro Fantasy Stars with Lamine Yamal, the young 16-year-old, youngest player ever now to score at a European Championships, and what a goal it was to tie the game. At this tournament, Lamine Yamal has been perhaps the best, not just in real life, but in fantasy as well. With 1 goal on 16 attempts, so as you can see, he's always looking to either get a shot off or find a teammate. With 3 assists, 80.34% pass accuracy, and 30 successful dribbles in this tournament. So Lamine Yamal, a lot of weight is being placed on both him and Nico Williams' shoulders at such a tender young age, and they are rising to the occasion. Obviously, they've had their kind of topsy-turvy games in the tournament, Germany being an example. But still, when asked to deliver, Lamine Yamal has been the catalyst for the Spanish side. Without him, they really lose a certain dynamic that really makes them tick. And who knows what they would have looked like if a different player was on the wing than Lamine Yamal. And now let's look at France. Obviously, France have always played this tournament-style football where they sit in and they rely on their forward players to counterattack and make opportunities on the break. And in transition, they're frightening to watch. But this tournament truly was the exception for them because they saw what they had in defense. Deschamps saw it, and he said that we should build around that because obviously a lot of these players are tired, and international football can tend to get a little bit dicey at times when, there's a lot of fatigue in your squad. And so he relied on a very solid backline that, to that point, had not conceded more than 2 goals in a game. And a lot of credit has to go to defenders, but specifically one man in particular, in between the sticks, and Mike Maignan. Mike Maignan had a very impressive tournament. His first true tournament as one of the goalkeepers for France who they can rely upon for years to come. 16 saves, 4 clean sheets, 84% pass accuracy, 4 punches, and 8 claims overall for Mr. Mike Maignan. When all is said and done, I think that he could win the Golden Glove Award for Best Goalkeeper at this tournament. He truly brought a sense of calm and composure to the French defense because you had a young guy in William Saliba paired with a more experienced veteran in Deo Upamecano, kind of playing in a familiar situation as he's been in the Bundesliga. But ultimately, Mike Maignan, being as impressive as he was, not necessarily called upon as much as people would think, but he got the job done for France. Kudos to France for playing and sticking with their defensive identity and doing what they do best, but ultimately they fell up short against a far superior team in terms of attacking prowess and how they approach the game, more importantly. Now we transition back to Spain, and there are a lot of players here who are seen more as role players in the squad. They're not necessarily the big names that's going to steal the headlines every single day, but they are metronomic presences that you can't necessarily drop at any given time because of the fact they really bring this team together and creates that attacking identity that just adds a little bit more extra verve to what Spain can do. And one of those players reminiscent of that ideology is Fabian Ruiz. Now, Fabian Ruiz has never been a midfielder who's gotten enough attention. He's bounced around a couple places, suddenly ending up at PSG, having a solid domestic season, albeit not necessarily a goal-scoring threat. But at the European Championships, he's looked like a man transformed. 2 goals, 2 assists, 90.4% pass accuracy, 15 attempts, and 10 dribbles. As for someone who, is seen as more of an attacking midfielder, but in a Spanish squad who really wants to allow their midfielders to focus on distribution of the ball out wide, he really has been someone who, when the Spaniards have needed service from guys like Lamine Yamal and Nico Williams, Fabian Ruiz has often found himself very much on the end of it. He had a great chance again yesterday in the France game, did not see it go in, but ultimately he's been the guy who has been on the end of a lot of Lamine Yamal assists, and he's just been a very underrated player. Kind of flew under my radar as well in terms of predicting which midfielders might perform, especially from a Spanish perspective, because a lot of people might have thought Rodri would have been the focal point, but he's more defensive, so ultimately Fabian Ruiz stepping up in that attacking midfield role truly is a testament to how Spain has built. Now, switching over from Spain to France in terms of midfielders, we're going to talk much more about that defensive midfield role for France because this guy has been doing it for so long, and I feel like we failed to respect him this tournament just because he moved away from a high-profile club to Saudi Arabia this season, and we just haven't heard enough about him, and that is N'Golo Kanté. 90.89 pass accuracy. He's played 513 minutes, 85 per match. That's fantastic for someone of his age. Completed 292 of his 318 passes. So, a lot of questions surrounded the reason why Deschamps brought in a guy like N'Golo Kanté when he could have relied on younger talents, Eduardo Camavinga and his versatility. Aurélien Tchouameni could have stepped in to that defensive midfield role instead of playing a hybrid role. But he stuck with N'Golo Kanté, and his presence rang true for France. I think that a lot of punditry didn't necessarily appreciate the fact that France were relying on a midfielder who's known for his off-the-ball prowess more than in transition. But that's just not what N'Golo Kante does. He's a metronomic presence who stands the test of time in any team you put him in. And so I don't see the reason why so many people were skeptical of N'Golo Kante, because he's someone you can trust. And overall, the narrative of this game showed where football could be heading and why it's important to have a team like Spain at this tournament. Luis de la Fuente has done a fantastic job just allowing the Spaniards to have freedom in how they play and how they create opportunities, whereas Deschamps is realizing that perhaps this transition to more defensive-minded international football can really benefit this French team in terms of not being too Mbappe-centric and Griezmann-centric as we've seen in this tournament. Ultimately, it fell up short for them, but I really thought this game showed the contrast between what international football can be, especially in a time where a lot of managers are getting concerned with how modern football is going to look. I really believe that this game shaped the narrative of that conversation very well. Ultimately, the players that I mentioned, seeing how two Spaniards that I chose were attacking players and two French players that I chose were more defensive-minded, it's really going to be the question of what do you do with these players in a very congested system. And so ultimately, I think that this game, I'm very happy, played out the way that it did, because it showed the different dichotomies of what international football is going to become. But this is just about do it for this Euros midweek recap. Coming up next on the show, we're going to be looking at the 2024 NHL draft class and seeing which rookies, especially guys like Celebrini and Lev Shadov, can impact their new teams. We're going to find out more about them on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast as soon as we come back from the break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.